Dear students, we will discuss friction. In friction, there are three important 4 marks questions. Before going into the answers of these 3 questions, let us discuss what is friction. So, it comes under Newton's laws of motion. So, friction is a type of force. So, what is the meaning of friction? Friction is a type of force. It comes into picture when the object wants to move or when the object is moving. So, friction is an opposition force which opposes the motion of the object. Suppose you hit a ball for a boundary in the cricket. Sometimes the ball exactly stops in front of the boundary. So, before going to the boundary or before reaching the boundary line, it stops over there. Who is stopping that force? Suppose you are cycling, you stopped pedaling the cycle. What happens? It moves for 100 or 200 meters depending upon the initial speed or depending of the road. It moves for 200 to 300 meters, then it stops. Then you have to start pedaling, otherwise you will fall down. So that force which opposes the motion of the object is called frictional force. So friction is an opposing force. Suppose some block of mass m is placed on the table. If I want to move this on this side, so there will be some force which opposes the relative motion between these two surfaces which are in contact. So this is called frictional force. If I want to move the same block in this direction, then friction appears in this direction. So friction is always opposite to the direction of the motion and it is parallel to the surface. And friction is a self-adjusting force also, that we are not going into detail. So basically this is friction. Friction depends on the surface of the, friction depends on the nature of the surface. Friction depends on the nature of the surface. If surfaces are rough, then the friction will be more. If the surfaces are smooth, friction will be less. Now the question is whether the frictional force or friction is advantageous or disadvantageous to the mankind. There are few advantages, there are few disadvantages. So whenever friction is advantageous, there you have to increase the friction, you have to try to increase the friction. Whenever it is disadvantageous, in those situations, you are supposed to minimize the friction, you are supposed to decrease the friction. But you cannot make friction zero, it's highly impossible. You can't imagine the situation where the friction is absolutely zero. That is not possible. So that is the reason why it is called friction is a necessary evil. Sometimes useful and sometimes not useful, right? So this is about friction. Now there are 3 types of frictions. One is called static friction. The other one is called kinetic friction. The third one is called rolling friction. As I told you, friction is nothing but force. Static friction is the friction existing between these two surfaces when the body is ready to move but not moving. That is called static friction. I am ready to move but not moving. Kinetic friction is the friction, it is also called as a sliding friction. When this block is sliding on the other surface, it's in motion, then that force is called kinetic frictional force. Suppose something is rolling on the surface. Suppose this ball is going on the ground, then there will be a frictional force between these two surfaces. That frictional force is called rolling friction. The magnitude of rolling friction is lesser than that of the kinetic friction or sliding friction, and the magnitude of this friction is lesser than that of the static friction. So if I write in terms of Fs for static friction, Fk for kinetic friction and Fr for rolling friction, then it will be like this. So that is the reason why it is very difficult to start a bullock cart. Once it gets started, the bullocks will find it easier to move. So while starting, the person who is on the bullock cart will get down and he will try to push the bullock cart, which is having lot of weight because of the bags loaded. So kinetic friction is less than the static friction, and rolling friction is further less than kinetic and static frictions. Right. There are 3 questions based on this. We are going to take the first question. Explain advantages and disadvantages of friction. If you write 2 points under each section, that is advantages and disadvantages, you will get 4 marks. This is the easiest question that you will find in your first year physics. No mathematical derivations, no formulae, no diagrams, nothing. Just write like a story, you will get 4 marks. Now let us take on advantages. What are the advantages of friction? Whatever you write, that is correct, because you cannot do anything without friction in your life. I can't even stand, I can't walk on the ground, I can't run. If there is no friction between my shoe and the floor, then I can't even stand. Just I have to fall on the ground. I can't run. If there is no friction between my fingers and this pen, I can't hold this pen. If there is no friction between this wall and a nail or a screw, I cannot fix them into the nail. I can't construct the building because I can't place one brick over the other brick. I can't apply brakes to my vehicle. So brakes are nothing but application of frictional forces in one way. If there are no brakes, imagine the world. Even after the functioning of proper braking to the vehicles, the advanced braking systems have come, we are able to see many accidents on the road. Imagine that there are no brakes to any vehicle, then what happens? Nobody can be stopped. So that is impossible, right? What are the advantages? You can run, you can walk, whatever you write, that is correct. You can run, walk on the ground. You can hold something. So holding of objects. So without friction, you can't hold. Holding of objects. Construction of walls by placing one brick over the other. You are able to place bricks. Fixing of screws. Or nails that may be to a wall or to a cardboard or something. Is this clear? Right. So ability to stop a vehicle. That means application of brakes. Is this clear? So these are all the advantages. We are able to lift a matchstick because of the friction between that matchstick and that rough surface on a matchbox. Is this clear? So these are all the advantages. Whatever you write, that will be correct. You can write, I am able to write the exam. So I am able to write the exam means what? There is a friction between the pen and the paper. There is a friction between your pen and your fingers. That you have to mention. Are you following? You are able to sit on the desk in the examination hall. You are able to place a book on the table. If there is no friction between the surface of the book and table, it won't stop over there. It won't stay on the table. It has to move. Where it goes, nobody knows. So these are all the advantages. Now what about disadvantages? Are there any disadvantages? Just now I told you there are disadvantages also with the friction. Now let us discuss disadvantages. Now number 1. So because of friction, heat is produced. Unnecessarily heat is produced. If you rub your 2 hands, you will feel they are warmer. Why? So friction is an opposing force. You are doing work against that force. So that amount of work is converted into heat energy. So what happens? So unnecessarily heat is produced. This heat is able to melt some of the machine parts. So that is the reason why frequently you have to change the machine parts. Suppose you have a vehicle, you have a cycle. So what are the machine parts? Tubes, even tires, machine parts, you have to change. Why? Due to wear and tear. Due to wear and tear. Are you following? So if I hold this object for many times, thousands, millions of times, it will also undergo wear and tear. You will find gold rings and bangles. They also undergo wear and tear. Their mass decreases because of the friction between your body and that ornament. Right? This is one. Second one is fuel is wasted. Engine has to do 2 things. Suppose you consider an automobile, the engine of the automobile has to do 2 things. It has to move, it has to spend some energy, and it has to do some work against the friction. No? To overcome the friction, the engine is putting lot of efforts. So, in order to overcome the friction, it has to do work. In order to do the work, it has to burn more fuel. That is the disadvantage. Another disadvantage is the efficiency of the engine decreases. Efficiency of the engine decreases. Suppose I buy a car for 10 lakhs. After 10 years, its value will not be 10 lakhs. There will be lot of depreciation. After few years, the mechanic says, the automobile mechanic says, sir, we cannot replace anything, just you have to discard the car as a scrap. Is this clear? Right. So these are all the disadvantages. You can write, even your shoe undergo wear and tear. You have to change your shoe frequently. Right? These are all the disadvantages. Now there are advantages and disadvantages. Then what to do? Whenever it is advantageous, you have to increase. Suppose you have steps in front of your residence, in front of your house. If these steps are so smooth, there is a probability of skid. You may break your legs. So what you have to do on these steps, that person who is constructing these steps, you will draw some lines on that cement surface to make it rough, so that your shoe will have some grip. So here we are increasing. In the same way, in railway tracks, wherever there is a curved railway track, and if it is raining, there is a probability of skidding. So what they do, they throw some sand, particles of sand on these rails, so that the friction increases. You have to see that your toilets are clean. If some water is lagged over there, you will have some smooth green layer over the tiles, then there is a probability of skidding. So very dangerous. So these are all the methods to increase the friction. There are methods to decrease the friction. That is an important 4 marks question. Mention the methods used to decrease the friction. Not to decrease, to minimize, to a larger extent, to a larger possible extent. So what are they? I will go straight away to the answer. The first one is polishing. As I told you, if the surface is smooth, friction decreases. If the surface is smooth, friction decreases. To some extent, you have to polish the surface, not to a larger extent. If you keep on polishing the surface, that means you are rubbing means you are removing electrons. Once the object loses electrons, it gets positive charge. And it induces negative charge on the other surface which is in contact or which is near to it. Then there will be some force of attraction. In that case, friction increases. So you should keep in your mind that to some extent this polishing is useful. To some extent this polishing is useful in reduction of friction. This is the first one. And second one is using lubricants. You know lubricants. Lubricants means oil, engine oil, grease, like that. We use oils. Suppose you have a sewing machine, your mother put some oil. Even for the vehicles also will put some oil. Suppose you have a bicycle, will put some oil. So oils and grease. This lorry people, they use a gun which is loaded with some grease to reduce the friction. The best solid lubricant is graphite. So graphite powder acts as a lubricant. So we use lubricants to reduce the friction. They form a layer between the two moving parts of the machine. They give some cushioning effect to the parts that are in motion. Is this clear? Right. Sometimes air also acts as a lubricant. When air is introduced between the two moving parts, it also creates some cushioning effect. Right. The third one is using ball bearings. You know ball bearings. There will be a circular ring, inner and outer circular rings. In between them, you will have balls made of steel. You might have seen in your vehicles. So why we have to use ball bearings? Because these balls have rolling motion. So sliding motion will be converted into rolling motion. As I told you, rolling friction is the least among all the other frictional forces. So ball bearings introduce rolling motion. So rolling motion reduces the friction. So this is the third way. If you just write one line each, you will get 3 marks up to this. The fourth one is streamlined structure. What do you mean by streamlined structure? That is also called streamlining. So streamlined structure is the structure adapted for the frontal face of the vehicles, automobiles, aeroplanes, even for the boats. You consider the beak of a bird, or you consider the front side of the fish. Instead of having this type of structure, the front structure of a bus can be constructed like this. If you see all cars and buses, so the front structure is resembling to the beak or the nose of a bird. So when some object is moving, suppose this board is moving towards you with a speed of 60 km per hour, the air also moves with a speed of 60 km per hour. So this moving air applies force on this moving board. If the same board is moving with 60 km per hour in the water will not allow it to move. Now what is the best way to take this board through air or through water? The best way is, instead of taking the board in this direction, I can bring the board in this direction from one place to another place. Here the area decreased. here the area is more. If the front side of the bus is like this, then the area is more. So the pressure exerted by air, that is nothing but the frictional force, will be more. The force will be more. So engine has to do lot of work to oppose the force. So once the structure is like this, then so air gets streamlined. So more air goes through the upper part. Even the aeroplane also have this type of structure. So more air streamlines are nothing but the imaginary lines which indicate the flow. More streamlines flow above the surface. According to Bernoulli's principle, if the velocity of the air is more, then the pressure will be less. So upper pressure is less, but the lower pressure remains same, so it gets lifted up. That is called dynamic lift. So as if its weight decreases. So engine feels that its weight is decreased, so it can do more work, right? So that is called streamline structure. So streamline structure is also called aerodynamic modeling. So all cars are nowadays having this type of structure. So you can reduce the friction by changing the frontal part. Is this clear? So this is about streamline structure. If you write these 4 points, you will get 4 marks. Is this clear? Now, let us move on to the last question of the friction, which is also important. But first 2 questions are very, very important when compared relatively with the third one. State the laws of rolling friction. As I told you, there are 3 types of frictions. One is static friction, the other one is kinetic friction, and the last one is rolling friction. Any frictional force is directly proportional to the normal reaction. This is the first law. The same law holds good for rolling friction also. What do you mean by normal reaction? Suppose there is a table on which I place a block of mass M. So its weight mg acts downwards. From Newton's third law, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So for this weight is nothing but force. Another force acts upwards, normal to the surface. So that is the reason why it is called normal reaction. If normal reaction is more, frictional force will be more. This is the first law. Why we are talking of laws of rolling friction in? Because we are talking of rolling friction only because it is different from other 2 frictions. Now, the second law is, according to second law, in the case of rolling friction, suppose other frictions, they do not depend on the surface area of contact. Suppose some ball is rolling on the ground, some ball is rolling on the ground. So the other 2 frictions, that is static and kinetic frictions, they don't depend on the area of contact. Whereas in the case of rolling friction, it does matter. Suppose you consider it as a tire of a car. The tube is with full of air, the area of contact will be less. If the sufficient air is not present in the tube of a car, or the tire looks like this. Here it is flattened, gets flattened. Here the area is more. The effective area of contact in this case is more and in this case is less. So the rolling frictional force in this case is less than the rolling frictional case of this one. The larger the area of contact, the larger will be the rolling frictional force. Is this clear? Right. This is the second law. And the third law is the rolling frictional force. The rolling frictional force also depends on the radius of the wheel or the anything that is moving. Generally, wheels only move, no? If there is no wheel, you can't imagine our world. Everything is moving. we are moving by bus or by car or by any vehicle, definitely it should have some wheel. All machine, all parts of the machine, definitely they have some wheels, right? Consider the same example. Here the radius will be less. Here the radius will be more. So you can come to a conclusion, frictional, that is rolling frictional force is inversely proportional to the radius. The higher the radius, the lesser the rolling friction. The lesser the radius of the vehicle, the higher will be the rolling frictional force. So if you write these three, you will be awarded with 4 marks. So these are the 3 important 4 marks questions from the chapter, from the topic called friction. I think the first 2 are very, very important. You concentrate on first 2. Out of first 2, definitely you will get 1. You can easily score 4 marks from this part. Thank you.